She is mentally sick. My mother screamed across the courtroom, her finger pointing at me like a loaded gun. I sat there in silence, smoothing the fabric of my blazer, watching the vein in her neck pulse with rage. The entire room held its breath. The judge, a man who had spent the last hour reviewing the evidence with a bored expression, slowly took off his glasses. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my mother's arrogant lawyer. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. The judge asked quietly, "Do you truly have no idea who she is?" The lawyer froze mid-sentence. My mother's face went from a furious red to a ghostly pale white. "Wait!" what she stammered. The gavel came down with a sound like a thunderclap, but in my mind it sounded exactly like the heavy thud of my father's casket, closing 6 months ago. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being the daughter they tolerated and became the woman they feared. My name is Zara, and at 32 years old, I have learned that the sharpest knives are not found in a kitchen drawer, but in the words of the people who are supposed to love you. Before I tell you how I brought my own family to their knees in a court of law, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who turned out to be the wolf. Because this story is not just about revenge. It is about the price of dignity. It started on the worst day of my life. The day we buried my father Otis. The sky over Atlanta was a bruised, purple, threatening rain that refused to fall. The air inside the funeral home was thick with the smell of lilies and expensive perfume, a suffocating mix that made me nauseous. I stood in the corner of the viewing room, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was wearing a black suit I had bought from a thrift store 3 years ago. It was clean and pressed, but the fabric was slightly worn at the elbows. I had not bought new clothes in years, not because I could not afford them, but because my family did not deserve to see the truth yet. I looked at my father lying in the mahogany casket. He looked peaceful, unlike the last few years of his life, where stress had carved deep lines into his face. He was the only person in this family who had ever looked at me with kindness. Now that he was gone, I was alone in a tank of sharks. "Well, look at what the cat dragged in." The voice was sharp, dripping with disdain. I turned to see my sister Bianca. She was 35 and looked like she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. She was wearing a custom-fitted black Chanel dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, perfect bun, and her makeup was flawless, not a tear track in sight. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my scuffed heels. "You could not have made an effort just this once," Bianca hissed, stepping closer so only I could hear. "You look like you work for the catering staff." Actually, that is an insult to the staff. They have better uniforms. "Do you have no shame, Zara? This is Dad's funeral. The senator is coming. The press is outside, and you stand here looking like a charity case. You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing Brad." I opened my mouth to speak, to tell her that Dad never cared about labels, that he cared about the people who actually sat by his hospital bed while she was posting selfies from a brunch in Buckhead. But before I could get a word out, I felt a sharp shove on my shoulder. It was Mama Louise, my mother. She was a vision of theatrical grief, wearing a wide-brimmed hat with a veil that did not quite hide her calculating eyes. She did not hug me. She did not ask how I was holding up. She simply used her body to block me from the view of the entrance. "Get to the back, Zara," she whispered harshly, fixing a fake smile on her face as she waved to a guest across the room. "Do not stand near the front. The photographer is setting up for the family portrait near the casket. We need Brad and Bianca front and center. They are the success stories. They are the face of this legacy." "But Mom, I am his daughter too," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I want to say goodbye." "You said your goodbyes at the hospital," Mama Louise snapped, grabbing my arm and pinching the skin. "Don't be selfish. Look at this room. These are important people. Investors. Politicians. If they see you standing there looking like a beggar, They will think Otis died broke. We have a reputation to maintain. Now go to the back and help the staff organize the water bottles. Make yourself useful for once in your life." She turned her back on me instantly, rushing forward to greet a local councilman with a wail of sorrow that sounded rehearsed. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear down the floral arrangements and tell everyone that the grieving widow had spent the morning worrying about her inheritance, not her husband. But I didn't. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and stepped back into the shadows, just like I had been doing my entire life. That was when Brad walked in. My brother-in-law, the golden boy. He was a tall, white man with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that never quite smiled along. He was wearing a suit that cost $5,000 and a watch that cost $20,000. He walked with the swagger of a man who owned the place, even though everyone knew he had married into my father's reputation. He spotted me standing near the service entrance. "Hey, kid," he called out, not bothering to lower his voice. He walked over, digging into his pocket. He pulled out a set of car keys and dangled them in front of my face like he was teasing a dog. "I parked the Mercedes about 3 blocks down," Brad said, pressing the keys into my reluctant hand. "The valet lot is full and I don't want the rain to spot the paint job if the storm breaks. Run down and get my cigarettes from the glove box, will you? And move the car closer to the side exit. I don't want Bianca getting her heels wet when we leave." I stared at the keys in my hand. He was asking me to leave my own father's funeral to run an errand. He was treating me like a valet. "Brad, the service is starting in 5 minutes," I said, my voice low. "Yeah, and it's going to be long and boring," he replied, checking his expensive watch. "Look, Zara, just do it. It's not like you have anything else to contribute today, right? Be a team player. We are all stressed." He didn't wait for an answer. He patted my cheek, a gesture that was patronizing and humiliating, and turned away to shake hands with a banker, laughing loudly at something the man said. I stood there clutching the cold metal keys, watching my family take their places in the front row. Mama Louise was sobbing into a lace handkerchief, leaning on Bianca for support. Bianca was looking stoic and elegant, holding Brad's hand. They looked like the perfect grieving dynasty. And I was the help, the invisible stain they were trying to scrub away. I tightened my grip on the keys until the metal bit into my palm. They thought I was weak. They thought I was broken. They thought I was nothing more than the disappointment of the family. They had no idea that the woman standing in the back of the room holding the keys to a Mercedes she could buy 10 times over was writing a list, and every single one of their names was on it. I turned and walked out the door, not to get his cigarettes, but to make the first call that would bring their house of cards crashing down. 3 days after burying my father, we gathered in the sterile conference room of Henderson and Associates. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, while Mama Louise, Bianca, and Brad clustered together at the head, looking like a corporate board ready to hostilely take over a lemonade stand. Mr. Henderson, a man who had been my father's attorney for 30 years, looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at me over the rim of his spectacles, his hands trembling slightly as he broke the seal on the envelope. He cleared his throat and began to read. The will was dated 10 years ago. I did not flinch. I knew this would happen. Dad had always intended to update it, but life and then illness got in the way, or so they thought. Mr. Henderson read the standard legal jargon, but the bottom line hit the room like a gavel. My father had left everything: the house in Buckhead, the savings accounts, and most importantly, Otis' Soul Kitchen, to his beloved wife Louise. I watched my mother. A grieving widow should have looked relieved that she was taken care of. Mama Louise just looked victorious. She let out a dramatic sigh, clutching her chest as if the weight of the fortune was too much to bear. Then, without skipping a beat, she turned to the man sitting next to her. "Brad, honey," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I cannot possibly manage all of this. My nerves are shattered. I want you to take over. I want to sign power of attorney over to you immediately. You are a businessman. You understand how these things work." Mr. Henderson frowned. Mrs. Jenkins, are you sure the restaurant is a complex operation and Zara here has actually… Mama Louise cut him off with a wave of her hand. Zara, please. Mr. Henderson, look at her. She is a dropout. She has never held a real job in her life. If I give the accounts to Zara, we will be bankrupt by Christmas. No, Brad is the only one here with the intellect to handle a legacy of this magnitude. He is a real businessman. He knows how to make money grow. Zara only knows how to spend it. She glared at me, waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to beg. I simply folded my hands in my lap. The silence in the room was deafening. Brad adjusted his tie, trying to look humble but failing miserably. The greed in his eyes was so potent I could almost smell it. I would be honored, Mama Louise, Brad said, pulling a pen from his suit pocket. I promise to treat Otis's legacy with the respect it deserves. We need to modernize. We need to trim the fat. He signed the papers right there on the table. In that moment, my mother handed over the keys to the kingdom to a wolf convinced she was giving them to a shepherd. I looked at Mr. Henderson. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. He knew, I knew. But the time to speak was not yet. I had to let them hang themselves first. That night, the humiliation moved from the boardroom to the dining room. We gathered at the family table for the first dinner since the funeral. The atmosphere was celebratory for everyone but me. Mama Louise had ordered steaks from a high-end butcher, and the smell of seared meat filled the room. Brad sat at the head of the table, my father's seat. It made my stomach turn. Bianca was glowing, talking about how they were going to redecorate the house now that the gloomy energy was gone. Mama Louise was nodding along, cutting her steak into perfect bite-sized pieces, and then there was my plate. While they feasted on ribeye and truffle mashed potatoes, I looked down at a bowl of vegetable soup. It was leftovers from the funeral reception. Cold, thin, and insulting. I did not realize we were rationing food, I said quietly, stirring the broth. Mama Louise did not even look up. Don't be ungrateful, Zara. Steaks are expensive. Brad and Bianca are working hard to secure our future. You are living here rent-free. We have to cut costs somewhere, and since you contribute nothing to this household, you can eat what is available. Brad chuckled, taking a sip of red wine that was older than I was. You know, speaking of costs, I have been looking at the numbers for the restaurant. What a disaster. Otis was a great cook, sure, but he was a terrible businessman. The place is bleeding money. It is an outdated mess. The decor is stuck in the 90s, the menu is too heavy, and the staff is paid way too much. We need to gut it. He sliced into his steak with aggressive precision. I gripped my spoon. He was talking about people who had worked for my father for 20 years. Miss Etta in the kitchen. Old man Jenkins, the janitor. They were family. You can't just fire everyone, Brad. I said, my voice steady despite the anger boiling in my veins. That restaurant is the heart of the community. It is not just about profit margins. Brad stopped chewing. He looked at me with a mix of pity and amusement. See, that is why you are sitting there eating soup, Zara. You think with your heart, not your head. Business is not a charity. But since you are so concerned about employment, I have a proposition for you. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin and leaned back, occupying the space with an arrogance that made the room feel smaller. I am going to need someone to help with the cleanup. We are firing the current cleaning crew to save money. If you want to earn your keep, I am willing to hire you. He paused for effect, exchanging a smirk with Bianca. As a janitor, minimum wage, cash under the table so you don't have to worry about taxes. You can scrub the floors and take out the trash. It fits your skill set, doesn't it? Since you walked away from Harvard, I assume manual labor is all you are qualified for. Consider it my charity to my wife's little sister. Bianca giggled. Oh, Brad, that is so generous of you. Did you hear that, Zara? He is giving you a chance to finally have a job. You should say thank you. I looked at the three of them. My mother indifferent and cruel, my sister petty and vindictive. and Brad the outsider who thought he had just won the lottery. They expected me to cry. They expected me to throw the soup in his face. They wanted a reaction that would prove I was the unstable emotional failure they claimed I was. Instead, I picked up my spoon and took a sip of the cold soup. It tasted like dishwater, but I swallowed it. "Thank you, Brad," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I will think about it." Brad laughed loudly, slapping the table. "That's the spirit. See? She knows her place. Pass the wine, Bianca. Let's toast to the new management." They clinked their glasses, crystal ringing out in the empty air. I watched the red wine swirl in the goblets, looking disturbingly like blood. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating my defeat. But as I sat there, invisible in plain sight, I wasn't thinking about scrubbing floors. I was thinking about the clause in the corporate bylaws of Otis Soul Kitchen that my father and I had written 5 years ago. A clause that Brad would have seen if he had bothered to do due diligence instead of just counting potential dollars. He thought he was hiring a janitor. He had no idea he was declaring war on the CEO. "Enjoy your steak, Brad. It might be the last good meal you eat for a long time." 1 week later, the house on Highland Avenue no longer felt like the home I had grown up in. It felt like occupied territory. Brad and Bianca had moved in with the subtlety of a demolition crew. Their boxes lined the hallways, blocking the photos of my ancestors. The smell of my father's pipe tobacco and my mother's lavender potpourri was gone, replaced by the chemical sting of fresh paint and Brad's overpowering cologne. They claimed they were moving in to care for Mama Louise, but it looked more like a hostile takeover. I came home from a long day of meetings where I was the CEO, the decision maker, the person everyone listened to. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, I had to shrink back into the role of the unwanted sister. I was unlocking the front door when I saw it. A pile of black trash bags and cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly on the curb, waiting for the garbage truck. Something about the shape of the boxes made my stomach turn. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sitting on top of a bag exposed to the humid Atlanta air was a vinyl record. It was not just any record. It was an original pressing of John Coltrane's Blue Train, my father's most prized possession. I dropped my purse and ran to the curb, tearing open the boxes. My hands shook as I pulled out album after album. Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, Billie Holiday. This was his soul. This was the collection he had spent 40 years building, the music that had filled our house every Sunday morning. They were tossing it out like garbage. "Hey!" I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and desperate. "What are you doing?" The front door opened. Brad stepped out holding a craft beer, looking annoyed that his evening was being interrupted. Bianca followed him, filing her nails. "Relax, Zara," Brad said, taking a sip of his beer. "We are just decluttering. The house is full of old junk. If we are going to sell this place for top dollar, or even just live in it comfortably, we need to modernize. That dusty old vinyl takes up half the living room. Nobody listens to that stuff anymore. It's depressing." "Depressing," I choked out, clutching the Coltrane album to my chest. "This collection is worth thousands of dollars, Brad. But that doesn't matter. It was Dad's. You cannot just throw it away." "Watch me," Brad sneered. He walked down the steps and kicked one of the boxes. A sickening crunch of breaking vinyl filled the air. "It's my house now. I decide what stays and what goes. And frankly, this trash smells like old man." I saw red. I didn't think. I just reacted. I lunged forward to grab the box he was about to kick again. I was trying to save the only piece of my father left in this house. "Don't you dare touch that," I yelled, shoving his leg away. Suddenly, a sharp, stinging pain exploded across my face. My head snapped to the side. I stumbled back, almost dropping the record. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. I looked up to see Bianca standing there, her hand still raised, her face twisted in ugly rage. She had slapped me. Hard. "Don't you ever touch my husband," she hissed, stepping between me and Brad like a guard dog. You are lucky we even let you stay here. You do not get to dictate how we decorate our home. These dusty records are ruining the aesthetic. I am trying to create a minimalist vibe, and this hoarding situation is triggering my anxiety. Your anxiety, I whispered, touching my burning cheek. Bianca, this is Dad's history. It is trash, Bianca screamed, her voice cracking. Just like you, it is just taking up space. Now get inside before the neighbors see you acting like a lunatic, and leave the garbage where it is. The truck comes tomorrow morning. I stood there, tears of rage pricking my eyes. I wanted to fight. I wanted to physically hurt them. But I knew that if I did, they would call the police. They would paint me as the aggressor. I looked at the broken records, then at their smug faces. I realized then that saving the physical objects was impossible, but I would make them pay for every single crack in that vinyl. I walked past them, head down, clutching the one album I had managed to save. I went straight to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My sanctuary. The only place in this house that was still mine, or so I thought. An hour later, there was a sharp knock on my door. It didn't wait for an answer. The door swung open, revealing Mama Louise. She wasn't holding an ice pack for my face. She wasn't coming to apologize for Bianca's violence. She was holding a clipboard. "Zara, we need to talk," she said, her voice cold and businesslike. She walked into my room and looked around with a critical eye, as if measuring the square footage. "Brad and Bianca are making great sacrifices to be here," she started, not even looking at me. "Bianca has a very stressful job. Being an influencer requires a lot of mental clarity. She needs a space to decompress. A sanctuary." I sat on my bed, still holding the record cover. "She has the master bedroom, Mom. She has the guest room. She has the entire house." "It is not enough," Mama Louise snapped. "She needs a dedicated space for her yoga and meditation. And the lighting in this room is perfect for her content creation. It faces east." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. "What are you saying?" "I am saying you need to move out of this room," she said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were empty of any maternal warmth. "We are turning this into Bianca's wellness studio. Move out," to where I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The basement is finished mostly," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "It is private. You like privacy, don't you? You always were a loner. Besides, it is cooler down there in the summer. It suits you. You have always been happier in the shadows." The basement. It was a windowless concrete box where we stored holiday decorations and old furniture. It smelled of damp earth and neglect. It was a dungeon. "You want me to live in the cellar so Bianca can have a yoga room?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't be dramatic, Zara," she said, turning to leave. "It is a roof over your head." "Which is more than you deserve, considering you contribute absolutely nothing to this household finances. Brad is being generous by not charging you rent. Have your things out by tomorrow noon. Bianca has a decorator coming at 1. She slammed the door. I sat there in the gathering darkness. The slap on my cheek still throbbed, but the pain in my chest was worse. They were stripping me of everything. My father's memory, my dignity, my physical space. They were pushing me down literally and metaphorically into the dirt. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the pile of records on the curb. They thought they were burying me. They thought that by shoving me into the dark, damp basement, they would silence me. They would make me disappear. I packed my bags that night. I didn't sleep. I moved every single item I owned down the creaky wooden stairs into the cold concrete room. I set up my bed next to the furnace. I arranged my small desk in the corner under the single flickering bulb. When I was done, I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled out my secret phone. The signal was weak down here, but it was enough. I opened my banking app. I looked at the numbers. Then I opened the folder marked Acquisition Targets. They wanted me in the dark. Fine. I work better in the dark. I would build my empire from this basement, and when I emerged, I would not be the daughter they recognized. I would be the landlord they couldn't afford. I texted my lawyer a single line. Accelerate the purchase of the debt. It was time to tighten the noose. 2 days later, Brad convened what he called a strategic family summit in the living room. He had set up a portable easel with charts and graphs blocking the view of the fireplace, where my father used to roast chestnuts every Christmas. Mama Louise sat in the center of the sofa like a queen awaiting tribute, while Bianca lounged on the armchair scrolling through her phone. I was not offered a seat. I stood by the doorway, leaning against the frame, feeling more like an intruder in my own home than ever before. Brad tapped a chart with a laser pointer, a red dot dancing over a projection of the neighborhood. He was wearing a new suit sharper than the last one, and his energy was manic. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "This is the future," he announced, his voice booming. "I have been in talks with Titan Development Group all week. They are looking to acquire properties in the district for a new luxury condominium complex. And guess what sits right in the middle of their proposed blueprint?" He paused for dramatic effect, grinning at Mama Louise. "Otis Soul Kitchen." Mama Louise sat up straighter, her eyes widening. "What does that mean for us, Brad?" "It means," Brad said, clicking a button to reveal a new slide with a single massive number on it, "that they are offering us $5 million for the land. Not the business, just the dirt it sits on. $5 million. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. $5 million was a lot of money, enough to turn heads, enough to make people forget who they were. Bianca gasped, covering her mouth. Mama Louise looked like she was about to faint from sheer ecstasy. "Oh my lord," Mama Louise whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. $5 million. Is that real?" "It is very real," Brad said, looking smug. "It is a cash offer. We close in 30 days. We demolish that eyesore of a restaurant, take the check and walk away. No more overhead. No more dealing with health inspectors or complaining customers. Just pure profit." I could not stay silent any longer. I pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the room. "You cannot sell," I said, my voice steady but hard. Brad rolled his eyes and sighed, dropping his laser pointer on the table. "Here we go." I was wondering when the peanut gallery would chime in. "That restaurant is not just an eyesore, Brad," I said, ignoring his insult. "It is a historical landmark in this community. Dad built it with his bare hands 40 years ago. It fed people during the riots. It hosted civil rights meetings in the basement. It is the only place left in the neighborhood where the elders can still get a meal for under $10. You sell to a developer and they will put up glass towers that nobody from this community can afford to live in. You are erasing our history for a quick paycheck." Brad laughed. It was a dry, condescending sound. "Listen to you. You sound like a bad PBS documentary. History doesn't pay the bills, Zara. Sentimentality is a cancer to wealth accumulation." He walked over to me, invading my personal space, looming over me with his height. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice dropping to a patronizing tone. "Do you know what the current capitalization rate of the restaurant is? Do you have any idea what the EBITDA looks like for the last fiscal quarter? Can you even tell me the projected ROI if we were to renovate instead of sell?" I stared at him. I knew exactly what those numbers were. I knew that the capitalization rate was lower than average because my father refused to raise prices on the seniors. I knew the EBITDA was healthy but not astronomical because we reinvested heavily in staff benefits. I knew all of it because I was the one who had secretly structured the holding company to absorb the losses so the restaurant could stay open. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. I didn't think so. Brad sneered when I didn't answer immediately. "You don't even know what those acronyms mean, do you? You are looking at this with emotion. I am looking at it with financial literacy. The restaurant is bleeding potential. It is a dead asset. Titan Development is offering us an escape hatch. Only a fool would refuse." He turned his back on me, dismissing me as if I were a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Besides," he added, glancing at Mama Louise, "it is not your decision to make. It belongs to your mother. And I think she knows what is best for her future." I turned to my mother. She was staring at the number on the chart, her eyes glazed over with greed. She wasn't thinking about the community. She wasn't thinking about the employees who would lose their jobs. "Mom, please," I pleaded. Dad wanted that place to run for another 40 years. He wanted it to be a legacy for the grandkids. You can't just let them tear it down for condos. Mama Louise finally looked at me. Her expression was chilling. There was no conflict in her eyes, only cold calculation. "Your father is dead, Zara," she said, her voice sharp and final. "He is in the ground. He doesn't have to worry about maintaining this lifestyle. I do." She stood up and walked over to the chart, tracing the number 5 with her manicured finger. "Do you know how long I spent smelling like grease and fried onions? Do you know how many nights I waited up for him while he was scrubbing those floors? I hated that place. I hated the smell of it. It was his dream, not mine. I am 60 years old, Zara. I deserve to enjoy the rest of my life." "But it is his legacy," I whispered. "I am his legacy," she snapped, "and I am choosing to cash out. $5 million. Do you know what I can do with that? I can finally go to Paris. I can fly first class. I can buy a villa in Tuscany and never look at a collard green again." She turned to Brad, beaming. "Sell it, Brad. Sell it all. I want that money in my account by next month. I am going to start looking at catalogs tonight. I need a new wardrobe for Europe." Bianca clapped her hands. "I will help you shop, Mom. We need to look the part. We can't be seen in Paris wearing last season's trends." They began to chatter excitedly about designers and travel itineraries, completely erasing the 40 years of sweat and sacrifice my father had poured into the business. They spoke of destroying his life's work, as if they were discussing getting rid of an old sofa. Brad looked at me and winked, a cruel, victorious wink. "You heard the boss," he said. "We are selling. Now why don't you be a good little helper and go make us some coffee? We have a lot of planning to do." I looked at them one last time. My mother, who had traded her husband's soul for a plane ticket. My sister, who saw the sale as a shopping spree. And Brad, the parasite, who was orchestrating it all. I turned and walked to the kitchen, but I didn't make coffee. I leaned against the counter, taking deep, steady breaths to keep my hands from shaking. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was silent because I was stupid. They didn't know that Titan Development Group, the company Brad was so excited to sell to, was a subsidiary of a larger firm, a firm called Phoenix Capital. My firm. Brad was negotiating with my employees. He was begging to sell my father's legacy to me. And he didn't even know it. I pulled out my burner phone and sent a text to my VP of Acquisitions. "Accept the offer, but add a clause. The seller must present a clean title with 0 liens or encumbrances within 48 hours of closing." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Brad was so focused on the $5 million that he had forgotten about the second mortgage my mother had taken out secretly 5 years ago to pay for Bianca's wedding. A mortgage that was technically a lien on the property. A mortgage that I had bought the debt for last week. They wanted to play hardball. Fine. I was about to show them that I didn't just know what EBTDI meant. I knew how to weaponize it. The ink on the listing agreement was barely dry when Brad transformed our home into a stage set. He hired a staging company to replace the remaining comfortable furniture with sharp, modern pieces that looked good but felt like sitting on ice blocks. The warmth of the Otis household was gone, replaced by a sterile beige showroom designed to appeal to the high-end investors of Titan Development. Tonight was the closing act, a cocktail party to seal the deal. I was in the basement listening to the heavy footsteps overhead when the door opened. Mama Louise descended the stairs carrying a hanger wrapped in plastic. She did not look at me. She looked at the exposed pipes and frowned, pinching her nose. "Here," she said, thrusting the hanger at me. "Put this on." I pulled the plastic away. It was a black dress with a white collar. A uniform. A maid's uniform. "Mom," I said, staring at the cheap polyester, "you cannot be serious." "Do I look like I am joking, Zara?" she replied, her voice tight with stress. "The catering staff is short, 1 person. Brad fired the usual company because they charged too much. We need someone to pass the hors d'oeuvres and keep the champagne glasses full. I am your daughter, I said, throwing the uniform onto my narrow cot. I am not going to serve your guests in a maid outfit while you sell Dad's legacy. You will do exactly as I say, she hissed, stepping closer. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any maternal softness. If you want to keep living under this roof, you will earn your keep. And let me make one thing perfectly clear. Tonight, you are not Zara Jenkins. You are just Zara the help. She leaned in her perfume, cloying and suffocating in the small space. If anyone asks, you are a distant relative we took in out of pity. Do not tell anyone you are my daughter. If you tell them you are my child looking like that with your failure of a life, they will laugh at me. They will think I do not know how to raise a child. I will not let you embarrass me in front of Titan Development. Do you understand? I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman cared more about the opinion of strangers than the dignity of her own flesh and blood. I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't my spirit. It was the last tether of loyalty I had to her. Fine, I said coldly. I will wear the dress. 30 minutes later, I was walking through the living room with a silver tray of crab cakes. The room was filled with men in dark suits and women in cocktail dresses, their laughter ringing false against the walls. Brad was in his element, holding court by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in one hand, gesturing wildly as he charmed the representatives from Titan. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible, silent. I offered food to people who didn't even look at my face as they took it. Well, hello there. A hand grabbed my wrist, stopping me in my tracks. I turned to see a man in a gray suit, his face flushed with alcohol. He was one of Brad's investor friends, a man named Mr. Sterling. He looked me up and down with a predatory sneer. Brad didn't tell me the help was this quality. He slurred, his eyes lingering on my chest. How about you put that tray down and get me a real drink, sweetheart? Something strong. And maybe you join me on the patio? It is getting crowded in here. Please let go of my arm, sir, I said, keeping my voice low. He laughed, tightening his grip. Don't be shy. I am buying this place. That practically makes me your boss. Come on, give us a smile. He pulled me closer. Instinct took over. I jerked my arm back with force. The movement unbalanced the heavy silver tray. It tipped. In slow motion, I watched 3 crystal flutes of red wine slide off the edge. They crashed onto the front of Mr. Sterling's gray suit and shattered on the pristine white rug Mama Louise had just bought. The sound of breaking glass silenced the room. The music seemed to stop. Mr. Sterling stood there, dark red liquid dripping from his lapels, his mouth open in shock. "You stupid bitch!" he roared, shoving me backward. Brad was there in a second. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't check to see if I was okay. He saw the investor. He saw the rug. And he saw me. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He grabbed me by the back of my neck, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Brad shouted over his shoulder, forcing me toward the kitchen. "We will pay for the suit. Everyone, please continue. Just a clumsy mistake by the staff." He dragged me through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The moment we were out of sight, he slammed me against the counter. The impact knocked the breath out of me. "You ruined it," he spat, his face inches from mine. "You did that on purpose. You are trying to sabotage this deal." "I didn't," I gasped, trying to push him away. He touched me. He grabbed my arm. "Liar!" Brad screamed. He grabbed a handful of my hair and yanked my head down. Before I could scream, he shoved my face into the stainless steel sink. He turned the faucet on full blast. Ice-cold water hammered against the back of my head, filling my nose and mouth. I thrashed, clawing at his hands, panic exploding in my chest. I couldn't breathe. The water was rising. I was drowning in my own kitchen sink while jazz music played in the other room. He held me there for 10 agonizing seconds. Long enough to make his point. Long enough to make me feel helpless. Then he yanked me up. I gasped for air, water dripping from my hair, coughing violently. "You are nothing," Brad whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "You are a stain on this family. Clean this mess up. If I see your face out there again, I will kill you." He stormed out, adjusting his cufflinks as he went. I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, shaking uncontrollably. Water pooled on the floor around my feet. The kitchen door swung open again. I looked up, hoping, praying it was someone coming to help. It was Mama Louise. She looked at me, shivering and soaked. Then she looked past me through the swinging door at the wine stain on the rug in the living room. "My rug," she moaned, her voice trembling with distress. "That was Italian wool, Zara. It cost $4,000. Mom, he just—" I stammered, pointing at the sink tears mixing with the water on my face. "Get a towel," Mama Louise snapped, glaring at me with pure hatred. "Not for you, for the floor, and stay in here. If you cost us this sale because of your clumsiness, I will personally throw you out on the street tonight." She turned on her heel and went back to the party, fixing a smile on her face as she apologized to the guests for the incompetent help. I stood alone in the cold kitchen. My hair was dripping, my cheek was bruised, my heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was clarity. They thought they had broken me. Brad thought drowning me would make me submissive. Mama Louise thought treating me like a servant would make me disappear. I wiped the water from my eyes. I walked over to the small staff bathroom in the corner and looked at myself in the mirror. The maid uniform was soaked. My eyes were red. But I wasn't Zara the victim anymore. I reached into the pocket of my wet apron and pulled out my phone. It was waterproof. I dialed a number. "Execute the clause." I whispered into the phone, my voice raspy but steady. "Now. And send the health inspector to the restaurant tomorrow morning. I want every violation found." I looked at the kitchen door. The party was getting louder. They were celebrating their future. They didn't know I had just canceled it. The morning after the cocktail party, the house smelled of stale champagne and regret. But while Mama Louise and Bianca were nursing hangovers with cucumber water and aspirin, I was printing the final nail in Brad's coffin. I had spent the entire night running a forensic accounting audit on my brother-in-law. It was not hard. For a man who claimed to be a financial genius, his digital footprint was as messy as a toddler's finger painting. I walked into the sunroom where Mama Louise was sitting. She looked fragile, her skin gray without makeup, staring out at the garden she believed she was about to leave for a Tuscan villa. I held a manila folder in my hand. It contained bank statements, lien notices from 3 different states, and a gambling debt record from a casino in Atlantic City that was so high it made my eyes water. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice soft. "We need to talk. Not about the rug, not about the party. About Brad." Mama Louise sighed, rubbing her temples. "Zara, please. My head is splitting. If this is about an apology for last night, save it. I am not in the mood to forgive you yet." "It is not an apology," I said, placing the folder on the glass table in front of her. "It is a warning. Before you sign those closing documents with Titan Development, you need to look at this. Brad is not who he says he is." She looked at the folder with suspicion, but before she could reach for it, a shadow fell over the table. Bianca stood there wearing a silk robe, looking like a wraith of fury. "What are you doing?" Bianca snapped, snatching the folder before Mama Louise could touch it. "What is this filth?" "Read it, Bianca," I said, standing my ground. "Your husband is not investing the family money. He is hemorrhaging it. He is $300,000 in debt to online sports betting sites. He has maxed out 3 credit cards in your name. And that real estate license he claims to have. It was revoked 2 years ago for fraud." Bianca flipped through the pages. I watched her eyes dart back and forth. For a split second I saw fear. I saw the recognition of truth. But then the walls of denial slammed back up. She laughed. It was a high, shrill sound that grated on my nerves. "You are pathetic," Bianca said, shaking her head. She looked at Mama Louise. "Mom, do you see this?" She spent all night forging documents. She printed these off some fake website to frame Brad. I did not forge anything I said, stepping closer. Look at the dates, Bianca. Look at the account numbers. Those are your accounts. He is draining you dry. If you sell the restaurant, he is not going to reinvest the money. He is going to use it to pay off loan sharks. Shut up, Bianca screamed. She took the stack of papers and ripped them in half. Then she ripped them again. She threw the confetti of evidence into my face. You are just jealous, she shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. You cannot stand that I found a man who is successful and handsome and loves me. You are a lonely, bitter failure, Zara. You want to destroy my marriage because you know you will never have what I have. Bianca. I am trying to save you, I insisted, ignoring the paper raining down on me. I don't need saving from my husband, she spat. I need saving from you. You are a cancer in this house. Brad is a visionary. He is a genius investor. He is going to make us millions. And you? You are just the maid who spilled the wine. Mama Louise finally spoke. Her voice was weak, but her words were deadly. Zara, that is enough. You have caused enough trouble. Stop trying to poison your sister's happiness with your lies. Brad has been nothing but good to us. Go downstairs. Get out of my sight. I looked at them. My mother willfully blind, my sister fiercely protecting the parasite that was killing her. I had given them the life raft. I had shown them the hole in the boat, and they had chosen to drown. Fine, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. I won't mention it again. But remember this moment. Remember that I tried to tell you. I turned and walked away. I could hear Bianca muttering about how I was mentally unstable as I closed the basement door behind me. The descent into the basement was like crossing a border between two worlds. Upstairs was a world of delusion, debt, and fake appearances. Down here, in the cool, damp silence, was reality. I sat on my narrow cot and pulled a small, sleek, black case from under the mattress. Inside sat my encrypted satellite phone and a laptop that cost more than Brad's car. The basement was dark, illuminated only by the thin sliver of light from the window well, but when I opened the laptop, the screen bathed my face in a cold blue glow. I was done playing the victim. I was done being the little sister. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. Davis here, a deep professional voice answered. It is me, I said, my voice dropping an octave, shedding the hesitant tone of Zara the daughter, and adopting the steel of Zara the CEO. Ms. Jenkins, the lawyer, replied instantly. We were waiting for your call. Did the family meeting go well? They rejected the intel, I said, watching a spider crawl across the concrete wall. They destroyed the evidence. We are moving to the next phase, understood, Davis said. Are we still holding the acquisition offer? No, I said. Let them think the deal is proceeding. Let them think they have won. But I want you to activate the lien purchase on the Buckhead house. Call the bank holding Brad's car note and buy that debt too. And contact the city zoning board. I want to make sure that whoever buys the restaurant land has to deal with a historical preservation inquiry. Consider it done, Davis said. And Ms. Jenkins. The private investigator found the other thing you asked for. The offshore account Brad has been hiding from his wife. It is in the Cayman Islands. Good, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. Keep that in the chamber. We will use it for the finale. I hung up the phone. Upstairs, I could hear the muffled sounds of Bianca laughing, probably apologizing to Brad for my crazy behavior. They were celebrating their victory over the jealous sister. They had no idea that the girl in the basement wasn't crying. She was calculating. They wanted to sell the family legacy fine, but they were going to find out that when you sell your soul to the devil, you better make sure the devil isn't your little sister. I closed the laptop. The darkness returned, but this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like a weapon, and I was finally ready to use it. Christmas Eve in the Jenkins household was usually a time of warmth and tradition, but this year the air was thick with a tension that no amount of pine-scented candles could mask. The living room was a shrine to excess. Brad had insisted on a 12-foot Douglas fir that scraped the ceiling, draped in gold ribbons and crystals that caught the light of the roaring fire. It was a beautiful display for a family that was rotting from the inside out. I sat on a folding chair in the corner, the only seat available to me after Brad had rearranged the furniture to highlight the tree. I watched as they exchanged gifts. It was a performance staged for an audience of 3. Bianca tore open boxes of designer shoes and handbags, shrieking with delight, while Brad sat back with a self-satisfied grin, sipping his third eggnog. Then came the main event. Brad stood up, cleared his throat, and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. The room went silent. Mama Louise gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. For the woman who started it all, Brad said, his voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. For the matriarch of this family. He handed the box to Mama Louise. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It was thick, heavy, and sparkled with an intensity that bordered on aggressive. To the untrained eye, it was a fortune. To my eyes, which had spent the last 5 years analyzing asset valuations and luxury goods for acquisition deals, it looked suspicious. The setting was too flashy, the stones a little too cloudy under the halogen lights. It screamed credit card debt, or worse, high-end cubic zirconia passed off as the real thing. "Oh, Brad," Mama Louise breathed, letting him fasten the cold metal around her neck. "It is magnificent. You shouldn't have. You deserve the best," Mom Brad said, kissing her cheek. "And don't worry about the cost. Business is booming." I looked down at my empty lap. There was no box for me, not even a card. I didn't expect one, but the deliberate exclusion still stung. It was a silent message. "You do not belong here. You are not part of this abundance." But the jewelry was just the appetizer. Brad clapped his hands together, signaling that the real show was about to begin. "That is not the only gift I have for you tonight," he announced, looking directly at Mama Louise. "I have been working the phones all week, and I have some incredible news. I found a new buyer for the property." Mama Louise looked up from admiring her reflection in the back of a spoon. A new buyer. What happened to Titan Development? Titan was lowballing us. Brad lied smoothly. "I found a private equity group from Dubai. They are offering $6 million. Cash. But there is a catch." He paused, letting the number hang in the air. 6 million. Enough to buy loyalty, enough to buy silence. "What is the catch?" Bianca asked, her eyes wide. "They want immediate possession," Brad said, his gaze shifting to me. "They want to start demolition on the 1st of the year. That means the house needs to be vacant, completely vacant, by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow," Mama Louise frowned. "But Brad, it is Christmas. Where will we go?" "I have already booked the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton for you and Bianca for the next month until we close on the villa," Brad assured her. "It is all taken care of. 5-star service room service, spa treatments. You won't even have to lift a finger." He smiled, a shark baring its teeth. "But the deal is contingent on the property being empty. No tenants, no squatters. The investors are very particular about liability." The room went deadly silent. They all turned to look at me. The squatter. The liability. So Mama Louise said slowly, the gears in her head turning, "We need to leave." Brad nodded. "And so does Zara." I stood up, my folding chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice shaking. "It is Christmas Eve. It is freezing rain outside. You are kicking me out tonight." "It is strictly business, Zara," Brad said, shrugging his shoulders. "I don't make the rules. The buyers want a clean handover. If you are still here tomorrow, the deal falls through. Do you really want to be the reason your mother loses $6 million? I looked at my mother. This was the moment, the final test. Surely even she, with all her vanity and greed, would not throw her own daughter onto the street in the middle of a winter storm. "Mom," I said, pleading with her eyes. I have nowhere to go. All the hotels are booked or expensive. I don't have a car. Please, just let me stay until New Year's. I will stay in the basement. I won't make a sound. Mama Louise fingered the necklace Brad had just given her. She looked at the sparkling stones, then she looked at me. I saw the calculation happen in real time. She weighed $6 million and a suite at the Ritz against my safety. It wasn't even a contest. You heard Brad? She said, her voice cold and detached. We cannot risk the deal. You are a resourceful girl, Zara. You will figure something out. Resourceful? I stepped forward. Mom, it is 30 degrees outside. You are choosing money over me? Again, I am choosing my future, she snapped, standing up. I am choosing peace. Look at you, Zara. You bring nothing but negative energy into this house. You mope around in the basement, judging us, looking down on us with your superiority complex, just because you read books and we live in the real world. I am tired of it. I am tired of feeling guilty every time I look at you. She walked over to the corner where my single, battered suitcase was sitting. I had packed it days ago, anticipating the worst, but I never thought it would happen like this. She grabbed the handle. For a woman of 60, she moved with surprising strength, fueled by adrenaline and greed. She dragged the suitcase toward the front door. Mom, stop! I cried out, chasing after her. She threw the door open. A gust of biting wind and sleet blew into the warm hallway, scattering the pine needles on the floor. The world outside was a black void of freezing rain. Get out! She screamed, heaving the suitcase down the front steps. It tumbled onto the wet concrete landing in a puddle of slush. She turned back to me, blocking the doorway with her body. She looked like a demon in a designer dress, her face twisted with a lifetime of resentment. This is my house, she spat, pointing a manicured finger in my face. Mine. Not yours. Not your father's ghost. Mine. I can sell it to whoever I want. I can live how I want. And I don't want you in it. Go find some other charity case to leech off of. I am done raising you. But Mom, I started, tears finally spilling over. Don't you call me that, she hissed. A real daughter would be happy for her mother's success. You are just a parasite. Now go, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. She grabbed my arm and shoved me. I stumbled backward, my heels slipping on the wet porch. I caught the railing just in time to stop myself from falling down the stairs. The cold hit me instantly. It soaked through my thin blouse, biting into my skin like 1,000 needles. I stood there shivering, looking up at her. Merry Christmas, Zara, she said. And then she slammed the door. The sound of the lock turning echoed like a gunshot in the silent street. I stood there for a long time. The freezing rain plastered my hair to my face. My clothes were soaked within seconds. I walked slowly down the steps to my suitcase, dragging it out of the puddle. My hands were numb, but I barely felt it. I looked back at the house. Through the large bay window I could see them. Brad was pouring champagne. Bianca was laughing, throwing her head back. Mama Louise was touching her necklace, smiling at the fire. They were toasting. They were celebrating the removal of the obstacle. They were celebrating the $6 million they thought was coming. They looked so warm, so happy, so completely unaware that they had just signed their own death warrants. I stood in the shadows of the oak tree my father had planted, watching them. The sadness that had weighed on my chest for months began to evaporate. It was replaced by something else, something colder than the ice storm around me. I wiped the rain from my eyes. I stopped shivering. I straightened my spine. They wanted me out, fine. I was out. And now the gloves were off. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my waterproof phone. The screen glowed bright in the darkness. I dialed Davis. Merry Christmas, Ms. Jenkins, he answered, sounding surprised. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, Davis, I said, my voice steady and calm. They just evicted me. I'm sorry to hear that, he said. Shall I send a car? Yes, I said, staring at the window where Brad was now raising his glass to the ceiling. Send the Maybach. Pick me up at the corner. And Davis. Yes, ma'am. Execute the purchase of the Titan Development Group subsidiary. Tonight, I want to own the company that is buying this house by tomorrow morning. And call the bank. Call in the loan on the necklace. The necklace. Yes, I said, watching Mama Louise preen in the window. Brad bought it on credit using a card linked to the business account. The business account that is technically insolvent. That necklace is stolen property. I want the repo team waiting for them in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton when they check in tomorrow. Understood, Davis said. Anything else? One more thing, I said, turning my back on the house that was no longer my home. Cancel the hotel reservation at the Ritz. But Ms. Jenkins Davis hesitated. It is Christmas. All the luxury hotels are fully booked. If we cancel, they will have nowhere to go. I know, I said, walking into the dark, wet street, the wheels of my suitcase clicking rhythmically on the pavement. That is the point. I hung up. The wind howled around me, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt powerful. I felt free. The victim was dead, left behind on that freezing porch. The CEO had finally arrived, and she was not in a forgiving mood. 3 months passed in a blur of silence. Winter in Atlanta gave way to a pollen-dusted spring, and with the change of seasons came a deceptive sense of peace. I was living in a high-rise apartment in Midtown, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I was slowly conquering. To the outside world, and specifically to my family, I was a ghost. I had changed my phone number. I had blocked them on social media. I had vanished into the ether, leaving them to deal with the wreckage of their own choices. I spent my mornings drinking espresso and watching the sunrise, a stark contrast to the damp basement where I had spent the last year. I had not told anyone about this place. My name was not on the lease. It was held by a shell company. As far as Mama Louise and Brad knew, I was likely sleeping on a friend's couch or living in a shelter. I preferred it that way. Silence makes paranoid people make mistakes, and I was counting on them to make a big one. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a heavy knock on my door. I checked the security camera feed. A man in a rumpled windbreaker stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored and underpaid. A process server. I opened the door. Zara Jenkins, he asked, not making eye contact. Yes, I answered. You have been served, he said, thrusting the envelope into my hands before turning to leave without another word. I closed the door and walked to the kitchen island, the heavy paper feeling like a brick in my hands. I knew this was coming. My team at Phoenix Capital had been monitoring the public court dockets, waiting for Brad's desperation to manifest into legal action. But knowing it was coming did not make the contents any less infuriating. I tore open the seal and pulled out the stack of documents. The bold letters at the top of the first page screamed at me. Superior Court of Fulton County, Plaintiff Louise Jenkins, Defendant Zara Jenkins. I began to read, and a cold laugh escaped my lips. It was a lawsuit, a civil suit for damages, but the accusations were so creative they belonged in a fiction novel. My mother was suing me for $500,000. The cause of action was listed as civil theft, elder abuse, and emotional distress. I flipped to the statement of facts, my eyes scanning the lies Brad had undoubtedly dictated to whatever sleazy lawyer he had convinced to take the case on contingency. The lawsuit claimed that during my time living in the family home, specifically during my residence in the basement, I had systematically embezzled family assets. It listed a detailed inventory of items that had gone missing over the last 6 months. Grandma's sterling silver tea set, the antique Tiffany lamps from the guest room, the collection of rare coins my father had kept in the safe. I remembered those items disappearing. I remembered asking Mama Louise about the tea set and her telling me she had sent it out for polishing. I remembered Brad coming home late one night smelling of nervous sweat, carrying a duffel bag that clinked with the sound of metal. He had pawned them. He had sold off our family history piece by piece to pay his gambling debts, and now, in a twist of sociopathic brilliance, he was blaming me. The narrative they spun was sickening. They painted me as a bitter, drug-addicted leech, who had stolen from her grieving mother to fund a secret lifestyle. The eviction on Christmas Eve was framed as a necessary protective measure, a desperate attempt by a terrified mother to remove a criminal from her home. I sat down on the bar stool, feeling the blood pound in my ears. They were trying to destroy my reputation. They were trying to criminalize me. But why now? Why 3 months later, I found the answer clipped to the back of the lawsuit. It was a letter from Brad's attorney, a settlement offer. It was short and to the point. The letter stated that Mrs. Jenkins was willing to drop the lawsuit and forego the $500,000 in damages if and only if I signed the attached document. I unfolded the attachment. It was a quitclaim deed. A quitclaim deed is a legal instrument used to transfer interest in real property. By signing it, I would be formally renouncing any and all claims I might have to the house on Highland Avenue and the land sitting under Otis' Soul Kitchen. I set the papers down and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city. It all made sense now. The sale to the Dubai investors, or whoever Brad was trying to hustle this week, had hit a wall. When I bought the debt on the house and the restaurant, I didn't just become the creditor. I created a cloud on the title. No title insurance company in America would insure a sale with the ownership history this murky, especially with the liens I had placed through my holding company. Brad couldn't sell the land because technically the ownership was in dispute. He needed my signature to clear the path. He needed me to legally say I have no rights to this property. And because he knew I would never sign it voluntarily, he had manufactured a crime. He was holding a gun to my head. Sign the deed, let us sell the land and take the millions, or we will drag you into court, brand you a thief, and bankrupt you with a $500,000 judgment that you cannot afford to pay. It was a trap. A crude, brutal, desperate trap. He was banking on the assumption that I was broke. He thought I was the same Zara who had worn a maid's uniform and begged to sleep in the basement. He thought I would be terrified of a lawsuit. He thought I couldn't afford a lawyer, let alone fight a prolonged legal battle against his high-priced firm. He thought I would fold. I walked back to the counter and picked up the lawsuit again. I looked at my mother's signature at the bottom of the complaint. It was shaky, hesitant. I wondered if she even knew what she was signing, or if Brad had just told her it was just another paper for the sale. It didn't matter. She had signed it. She had declared war on her own daughter in the public record. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For months I had been pulling strings from the shadows, letting them trip over their own greed. But this was an invitation to step into the light. They wanted a court battle. They wanted to talk about stolen assets and financial mismanagement in front of a judge. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Davis, my lawyer, immediately. First, I called my forensic accountant. Pull the files on the pawnshop transactions we found last month, I said, my voice steady. The ones linked to Brad's driver's license. And get me the security footage from the house for the dates the silver went missing. I know we have it backed up on the cloud server. I waited for the confirmation. Got it, the accountant said. Anything else? Yes, I said. Prepare a counterfiling. We aren't just defending against this suit. We are filing a cross-complaint for defamation, fraud, and malicious prosecution. And I want to subpoena Brad's financial records. All of them. Including the offshore accounts. I hung up and looked at the quitclaim deed one last time. I ripped it in half, the sound sharp and satisfying in the quiet apartment. They wanted me to sign away my legacy to save my skin. They didn't realize that by dragging me into court, they were dragging themselves into the slaughterhouse. Brad thought he was setting a trap for a mouse. He had no idea he had just locked himself in a cage with a lion. I grabbed a pen and wrote a note on the torn settlement offer, intending to mail it back to their lawyer. It was just 3 words. See you there. I tossed the envelope into the recycling bin. The game of cat and mouse was over. It was time for the courtroom. It was time for the truth. And I was going to make sure that when the gavel finally fell, it would sound like the closing of a coffin lid on Brad's entire life. I checked the time. It was noon. I had a board meeting at 2. I walked to my closet and pushed aside the soft sweaters and jeans. I reached for the back, pulling out a garment bag I hadn't opened since my days on Wall Street. I unzipped it to reveal a tailored navy blue power suit, sharp, intimidating, expensive. I put it on looking at myself in the full-length mirror. The Zara who cried in the rain on Christmas Eve was gone. The woman staring back at me was ready for war. "I am coming for you, Mom," I whispered to the reflection. "And I am bringing receipts." The day of the trial, the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse looked less like a hall of justice and more like the red carpet of a twisted reality show. I arrived in a yellow taxi, paying the driver with a crisp $20 bill. From the curb, I watched the spectacle unfold. Mama Louise and Bianca had arrived in a rented limousine. They stood near the entrance, surrounded by a gaggle of local reporters that Brad had undoubtedly tipped off. Mama Louise was dressed in a conservative navy suit that screamed grieving mother. She held a lace handkerchief to her dry eyes, leaning heavily on Bianca for support. Bianca, wearing oversized sunglasses and a somber expression, looked like she was auditioning for a role in a funeral drama. I could hear snippets of my mother's voice drifting over the noise of the morning traffic. She was speaking into a microphone held by a reporter from the local news station. "It breaks my heart to be here," she was saying, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "A mother never wants to punish her child. But sometimes tough love is the only way to save them. We just want Zara to get the help she needs. We want her to take responsibility for her addiction to stealing." I adjusted the lapels of my simple gray suit and walked past them. I did not stop. I did not look at the cameras. I was a ghost in their narrative, the silent villain they needed to justify their greed. As I climbed the stone steps, I felt Bianca's gaze burning into my back. They thought my silence was shame. They had no idea it was focus. Inside, the courtroom was cold and smelled of old wood and floor wax. I took my seat at the defendant's table next to Davis. My lawyer was calm, organizing his files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. On the other side of the aisle, my family sat like royalty. Brad was there, sitting in the gallery directly behind Mama Louise, whispering into the ear of their attorney, a man named Mr. Garrison, who wore a suit that was too shiny and a smile that was too sharp. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Vance entered. He was an older black man with a stern face and eyes that had seen every lie Atlanta had to offer. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked at the docket. "Plaintiff, you may call your first witness." Judge Vance said, his voice deep and resonating through the room. Mr. Garrison stood up, buttoning his jacket. "We call Louise Jenkins to the stand." Mama Louise walked to the witness box. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I watched her hand. It didn't tremble. She was so convinced of her own righteousness that lying on a holy book meant nothing to her. Mr. Garrison began his examination, gently treating her like a fragile porcelain doll. "Mrs. Jenkins, can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, your daughter Zara?" Mama Louise sniffled, dabbing her eyes. "I have always tried to love Zara, but she has always been difficult. Unlike her sister, who is successful and driven, Zara has never had any ambition. She dropped out of college. She refused to get a job. For years, I let her live in my house for free because I didn't want her to be homeless." "And how did she repay this kindness?" Garrison asked, pacing in front of the jury box. "She stole from me," Mama Louise sobbed. "Little things at first. Cash from my purse. Then it was the family heirlooms. The silver tea set my grandmother gave me. The antique coins. I tried to ignore it. I prayed for her. But when she started threatening me, when she refused to leave the house so we could sell it and move on, I had no choice." She looked directly at me then. Her eyes were wet, but behind the tears there was a hardness that chilled me to the bone. "I am afraid of her," she whispered theatrically. "She is unstable." Mr. Garrison nodded solemnly. He turned to me, pointing a finger. "So, to clarify for the court, Mrs. Jenkins, Your daughter Zara Jenkins has no employment history in the last 5 years. She paid no rent. She contributed nothing to the household expenses. Nothing, Mama Louise said, shaking her head. She just sat in the basement all day. I don't know what she was doing down there. Probably drugs. She is a parasite. She drained me dry emotionally and financially. Mr. Garrison turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Vance looked at Davis. Cross-examination. Davis stood up. He didn't walk toward the witness stand. He stayed at our table looking down at a piece of paper. Mrs. Jenkins, he said, his voice mild. You claim my client has no job and paid no rent. Is that correct? Yes, Mama. Louise snapped, her sadness instantly replaced by defensiveness. She is a bum. Everyone knows it. And you stated that the reason you evicted her on Christmas Eve was because you had a buyer for the house and her presence was a liability. Yes, the investors from Dubai. They wanted a clean house. Thank you, Davis said. He looked up, locking eyes with her. Mrs. Jenkins, are you aware that perjury is a felony? Objection. Garrison shouted, jumping up. Counsel is intimidating the witness. Sustained, Judge Vance said, though he was watching Mama Louise closely. Watch your tone, counselor. Davis didn't blink. He picked up a document. Mrs. Jenkins, I am just trying to understand the timeline. You say my client stole silver to pay for her lifestyle. Yet you also claim she lived in your basement and never went anywhere. If she had no job and no money, how did she pay for the taxi to get here today? How is she wearing a suit that, if I am not mistaken, is from the current Armani collection? Mama Louise scoffed. She probably stole that too. Or maybe she is selling her body. I don't know what she does. I told you she is sick, the courtroom murmured. Judge Vance banged his gavel. Davis continued, unbothered. You seem very certain about her failures. Tell me, Mrs. Jenkins, if Zara is such a burden, why did you cash the checks that were deposited into your account every month for the last 5 years from a company called Z Holdings? Mama Louise froze. What, I don't know what you are talking about. Every month, Davis said, holding up a bank statement. $3,000, labeled rent assistance, deposited directly into your personal checking account. You spent it on, let's see, beauty treatments, Nordstrom runs, and lease payments for a Mercedes. That was from Brad. Mama Louise stammered, looking frantically at her son-in-law in the gallery. Brad said he was handling the finances. Davis smiled, a cold, predatory smile. We will get to Brad in a moment, but right now I am asking you about your daughter. You called her a parasite. You called her a thief. But looking at her sitting there calm and collected, doesn't it strike you as odd that the unstable daughter is the only one who hasn't raised her voice today? That was the spark. Mama Louise's face turned a violent shade of red. The mask of the grieving mother slipped, revealing the narcissistic rage beneath. She gripped the railing of the witness stand so hard her knuckles turned white. Don't you dare judge me, she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. You don't know her. You don't know what it's like to have a child who is a failure. Look at her, sitting there with that smug look on her face. She pointed a shaking finger at me. I didn't flinch. I just stared back at her, my face a mask of stone. She is doing this to spite me, Mama Louise yelled, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She is jealous of Bianca. She is jealous of Brad. She wants to ruin us because she is miserable. Mrs. Jenkins, please control yourself, Judge Vance warned, leaning forward. I won't, she wailed, standing up. She is mentally sick. She is a total disgrace to this family. She has been rotting in that basement for years while we took care of her, and this is how she repays us, by dragging her own mother into court. She should be in an asylum, not a courtroom. The silence that followed her outburst was heavy. The court reporter had stopped typing. The jury looked uncomfortable. Brad had his head in his hands. I remained perfectly still. I looked at the judge. Then I looked at my mother, who was heaving breaths, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Judge Vance slowly took off his glasses. He looked at Mama Louise, then he looked at me. He looked at the file on his desk, then back at me. His expression changed from annoyance to something else, confusion, and then recognition. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Mr. Garrison, who looked ready to crawl under the table. Counselor, the judge asked quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Do you truly have no idea who the defendant is? Mr. Garrison blinked confused. Your Honor. She is the plaintiff's daughter, an unemployed woman who... The judge shook his head slowly. He looked at Mama Louise, whose face was beginning to drain of color as the adrenaline faded and fear set in. Wait. What? Mama Louise whispered, her voice barely audible. Judge Vance picked up a magazine that was sitting under his files. It was the latest issue of Fortune. He held it up. On the cover was a woman in a navy blue power suit, standing in front of the Atlanta skyline. The headline read, The Silent Architect, How Zara Jenkins Built a Real Estate Empire from the Shadows. I think the judge said, dropping the magazine onto his desk with a heavy thud, that you have made a very grave mistake, Mrs. Jenkins. You are not suing a squatter. You are suing the owner of half of downtown Atlanta. The courtroom erupted. I finally allowed myself a small smile. The trap had snapped shut. The silence in the courtroom following Judge Vance's question was thick enough to choke on. Mr. Garrison, the lawyer who had spent the last 24 hours painting me as a destitute failure, looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. He tugged at his collar, sweat visible on his forehead despite the aggressive air conditioning. I object to this line of questioning, Your Honor. Garrison stammered, his voice losing its theatrical boom. The defendant's employment status is irrelevant to the charges of theft. Even a CEO can steal silver spoons. Judge Vance did not look impressed. He slowly opened a new file that my lawyer Davis had submitted into evidence that morning. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the papers with the scrutiny of a hawk circling its prey. It is entirely relevant, Counselor, the judge said, his voice calm but dangerous. You are asking this court to believe that Ms. Jenkins stole from her mother out of financial desperation. You are asking for punitive damages based on her inability to pay rent. But I am looking at a certified audit of the defendant's tax returns for the last fiscal year. The judge looked up, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Mr. Garrison, are you absolutely certain about your assessment of the defendant's financial status? Because according to these documents, Ms. Jenkins paid more in federal income tax last year than your entire law firm grossed in revenue. A ripple of shock went through the jury box. Mama Louise looked at Brad, her eyes wide with confusion. Brad was staring at the table, his face a mask of dawning horror. He knew exactly what kind of money was required to pay those kinds of taxes. Davis stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive movement. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, the defense would like to present a visual aid to clarify the true nature of the relationship between the Jenkins family and the family assets. Proceed, the judge said, leaning back in his chair. Davis nodded to the bailiff, who dimmed the lights. A projector screen descended from the ceiling. A crisp, high-definition slide appeared. It showed a complex corporate organizational chart. At the very top, in bold blue letters, was the name, Phoenix Capital. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Davis began walking toward the jury box. The plaintiff has described Zara Jenkins as a squatter, a basement dweller, a burden. But the reality is quite different. Zara Jenkins is the founder and majority shareholder of Phoenix Capital, the largest minority-owned venture capital firm in the Southeast. He clicked a remote. The slide changed to a portfolio of buildings, skyscrapers in Midtown, apartment complexes in Buckhead, commercial centers in Decatur. She does not just work there, Davis continued. She owns it. She owns the building we are sitting in right now. She owns the bank where Mrs. Louise Jenkins has her checking account. And most importantly, she owns the debt that this family has been drowning in. Mama Louise let out a gasp. She stood up, knocking her purse to the floor. That is a lie. She works in the basement. I saw her down there. She has nothing. Sit down, Mrs. Jenkins, the judge ordered sharply. Davis ignored her outburst and clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a scanned document. It was a contract dated 5 years ago. It bore the signature of my father, Otis Jenkins. Let us talk about the theft. Davis said, his voice dropping to a somber tone. You claim Zara stole from the family, but 5 years ago your late husband Otis Jenkins came to his daughter in secret. He was terrified. He had discovered that his wife Louise had drained the restaurant's operating accounts to fund her gambling addiction and luxury shopping sprees. The courtroom gasped. I looked at my mother. She was shaking her head violently, her hands covering her mouth. Liar, she whispered. Otis knew the restaurant was days away from bankruptcy, Davis said, pointing at the screen. He could not trust his wife with the money, so he did the only thing he could to save his legacy. He sold 49% of Otis' Soul Kitchen to a silent investor. That investor was Phoenix Capital. That investor was Zara Jenkins. I watched Brad. He had turned a sickly shade of gray. He was doing the math. He realized that for the last 5 years, every time he insulted me, every time he threatened to fire me, he was talking to the majority shareholder. My client bought the shares for $500,000, Davis said. She paid off the debts, she kept the lights on, she paid the staff, and she let you believe you still owned it all because she promised her father she would not humiliate his wife while he was alive. Davis walked over to the plaintiff's table and placed his hands on the wood, leaning in close to Mama Louise. She didn't steal your silver, Mrs. Jenkins. She bought your survival, and you paid her back by throwing her out in the snow. Mr. Garrison looked like he wanted to vanish. He tried to shuffle his papers looking for an escape route, but Davis was not done. There is one final matter, Davis announced, turning back to the screen. The matter of the sale, the eviction. The slide changed again. This time it showed an email chain. The subject line read, Acquisition of Highland Avenue Property. The emails were between Brad and a representative from Titan Development Group. Mr. Brad Wilson here, Davis said, gesturing to my brother-in-law, was so eager to sell the family home. He evicted Zara to close a deal with Titan Development for $6 million. He thought he was pulling off the heist of the century. Davis paused for effect. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the projector fan. But Brad is not a very good researcher. If he had looked past the shell company, he would have realized something very interesting about Titan Development Group. Davis clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed the corporate structure of Titan Development. A red line connected it directly to its parent company, Phoenix Capital. Brad stood up so fast, his chair fell backward with a loud crash. No, he rasped, his voice sounding strangled. That is impossible. It is very possible, Brad, I spoke up for the first time. My voice was calm, carrying clearly across the room. You were trying to sell my own house back to me. Davis turned to the jury, spreading his hands wide. The defendant, Zara Jenkins, is the CEO of the company buying the house. She is the owner of nearly half the restaurant. She is the one who has been paying the mortgage for 5 years through her holding company. The plaintiff, Louise Jenkins, and her son-in-law, Brad, have attempted to sell assets they do not fully own to the very person they are suing for theft. Davis turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is not a lawsuit. This is a shakedown. And frankly, it is the most incompetent shakedown in the history of this court. We move for immediate dismissal of all charges, and we are filing a cross-complaint for fraud, defamation, and malicious prosecution. Judge Vance looked at the screen. Then he looked at Brad, who was now trembling uncontrollably. He looked at Mama Louise, who had collapsed back into her chair, sobbing not with grief, but with the realization that her golden goose was actually a dragon. The judge closed his file with a definitive snap. Mr. Garrison, the judge said, his voice ice cold, I suggest you take your clients into the hallway and explain to them what the word perjury means. And while you are at it, Explain to Mr. Wilson that attempting to sell a property with undisclosed liens to a shell company constitutes securities fraud. Judge Vance looked at me. His eyes softened just a fraction. Ms. Jenkins, I apologize that this court's time was wasted on such a farce. The motion to dismiss is granted, and I am granting the motion for the cross-complaint. He banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot ending the life of the Jenkins family dynasty. Court is adjourned. As the room erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, the jury whispering excitedly. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I didn't look at the chaos. I looked straight at Brad. He was staring at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hatred. He mouthed one word. Why? I picked up my purse and walked over to the railing. I leaned in close so only he could hear me over the noise. Because you broke my records, Brad, I whispered. And because you forgot the first rule of business, know who you are dealing with. I turned and walked down the aisle, the flashbulbs of the cameras blinding me, but I didn't blink. I walked past my mother, who was wailing into her hands, crying about how I had tricked her. I didn't stop to comfort her. That part of me had died in the snow on Christmas Eve. I walked out of the courtroom doors and into the hallway. The air tasted sweeter. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest for years was gone. But I wasn't done yet. Dismissal was just the defense. Now it was time for the offense. I pulled out my phone. I had one more call to make. The Cayman Islands account. The final nail. I dialed the number. Davis, I said as he walked up beside me, grinning like a shark. Yes, boss. Release the file to the IRS, I said, not breaking stride. And call the repo team at the Ritz. Tell them they can go ahead and collect the necklace. I want it back in my vault by dinner. Davis laughed. You are ruthless, Zara. I put on my sunglasses. I am not ruthless, Davis. I am just conducting business. And business is booming. The gavel had banged, signaling the end of the session, but nobody moved. The air in the courtroom was so heavy with shock that it felt hard to breathe. I stood at the defendant's table, smoothing the fabric of my suit, watching the destruction of my family unfold in slow motion. It was a masterpiece of their own making. Brad looked like he had been struck by lightning. His skin, usually tanned from golf weekends he could not afford, was now a sickly, translucent gray. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out, just shallow, terrified gasps. Beside him, Bianca was frozen, her hand halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting between me and the screen that still displayed the corporate structure of Phoenix Capital. She looked like a child who had just realized the monster under the bed was real. But it was Mama Louise who drew my attention. Her hands, which had been clutching her rosary beads like a lifeline, suddenly went limp. The beads slid through her fingers and hit the wooden floor with a sound that echoed like scattered bones in the silent room. She was shaking a violent tremor that started in her hands and took over her entire body. She looked at the judge, then at the screen, and finally at me. Her eyes were not filled with anger anymore. They were filled with a terrifying, hollow realization. Judge Vance was not finished. He had dismissed the case, but he had not dismissed the moral judgment. He leaned over his bench, clasping his hands together, and fixed my mother with a stare that could have melted steel. Mrs. Jenkins, the judge, said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the chest of everyone present. I have sat on this bench for 20 years. I have seen families tear each other apart for money. I have seen greed. I have seen betrayal. But this is a special kind of tragedy. He picked up a file from his desk. It was the medical financial history Davis had submitted. You sat there and testified under oath that your daughter was a burden. You called her a parasite. You claimed she contributed nothing. The judge flipped a page, the sound sharp in the silence. I am looking at the billing records for your heart surgery 3 years ago. $200,000. Paid in full. I am looking at the invoices for your hip replacement. $80,000. Paid in full. I am looking at the monthly cost of your prescriptions. $2,000. Paid in full. He looked over his glasses at her. Did you really think Medicare covered a private room at St. Joseph's Hospital? Did you think the best cardiac surgeon in Atlanta worked pro bono? No. Someone paid those bills. And according to these wire transfers, that someone was not your son-in-law. It was not your husband's ghost. It was the woman you just tried to throw in jail. Mama Louise let out a choked sob. No, she whispered. Brad said he took care of it. Brad said he had insurance. The judge shook his head, a look of profound pity and disgust on his face. You are suing the hand that fed you, Mrs. Jenkins. You are suing the person who kept you alive. You called your benefactor a disgrace. I think the only disgrace in this room is sitting in the plaintiff's chair. Mama Louise turned slowly to Brad. Her face was crumbling. You lied to me, she rasped. You said you paid the bills. You said you were taking care of us. Brad finally found his voice. It was high and shrill, cracking with panic. I did take care of you. I managed the accounts. It is complicated, Mom. You don't understand high finance. She tricked us. She set this up to make me look bad. He was scrambling, looking for an exit, looking for a narrative that would save him. But I was done letting him speak. I nodded to Davis. We are not quite done. Your Honor, Davis said, stepping forward. While the civil matter of the lawsuit is dismissed, the defense has an obligation to present evidence regarding the cross-complaint for fraud, specifically regarding the collateral used for the loans Mr. Wilson took out. Davis walked over to the evidence table and picked up a stack of documents sealed in plastic. Mr. Wilson claims he is a financial genius, but his methods are somewhat unconventional, specifically his tendency to sign names that do not belong to him. Davis handed the documents to the bailiff to give to the judge. These are loan applications for 3 separate hard money lenders, totaling $400,000. The collateral listed is the property on Highland Avenue. The signature on the deed of trust is Louise Jenkins. Mama Louise gasped. I never signed any loans. I told him not to touch the house equity. Exactly, Davis said, turning to Brad. We had a handwriting expert analyze these signatures against Mrs. Jenkins's known signature from the lawsuit filing. They are a forgery, a clumsy one at that. Brad jumped up, knocking his chair over. That is a lie. Those are legitimate. She gave me verbal permission. Verbal permission does not sign a legal document, Brad, I said from my seat, my voice cutting through his panic. But that is not even the worst part. I stood up and walked to the edge of the divider. You sued me for stealing the silver tea set. You sued me for stealing the antique coins. You wanted $500,000 for the missing items. I pulled a thick envelope from my purse and tossed it onto the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy thud. Those are the pawn shop receipts, Brad. Dated 6 months ago. Signed by you. With a copy of your driver's license attached to every transaction. You stole the silver. You stole the coins. You stole Dad's watch. And then you sued me for it, because you needed someone to blame when Mom started asking where her things went. The courtroom erupted. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. This was a crime scene. Brad looked at the envelope. He looked at the judge. He looked at the exit. He took a step toward the aisle. Bailiff Judge Vance barked, his voice like a whip crack. Detain Mr. Wilson. 2 large officers, who had been standing by the wall, moved instantly. They intercepted Brad before he could take 3 steps. Get your hands off me! Brad screamed, flailing as they grabbed his arms. Do you know who I am? I am a businessman. This is a misunderstanding, Bianca. Tell them I didn't do it. Bianca was sobbing now, hugging herself, shrinking away from her husband as if he were radioactive. She didn't say a word. She just watched as the officers spun him around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Click, click, click. Mr. Bradley Wilson, one of the officers said, reciting the words I had waited months to hear. You are under arrest for forgery, wire fraud, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. No. Brad howled as they hauled him toward the side door leading to the holding cells. Mom, Bianca. Do something, Zara. Zara, please tell them to stop. We are family. I watched him go. I watched the man who had shoved my head into a sink full of water, the man who had laughed while I stood in the freezing rain, be dragged away like the common criminal he was. When the door slammed shut behind him, the silence rushed back into the room. But it was different now. It was the silence of a crater after the bomb has gone off. Mama Louise was slumped over the table, weeping openly. Bianca was staring at the empty space where her husband had been her perfect life, unraveling thread by thread. Judge Vance looked down at them, then at me. "Ms. Jenkins," he said softly, "I am forwarding these evidence files to the district attorney's office. I assume you will be available to testify. I will be there, Your Honor," I said. The judge nodded. Then he looked at my mother one last time. "God have mercy on you, Mrs. Jenkins. Because your daughter certainly doesn't have to." He stood up and left the bench. I gathered my files. Davis gave me a small, respectful nod and stepped back to give me space. I turned to leave. "Zara." The voice was weak, broken. It was my mother. She had lifted her head. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. She looked 20 years older than she had this morning. "Zara, wait," she sobbed, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. He tricked me. He tricked all of us." I stopped. I didn't turn my body fully, just my head. I looked at her hand reaching out. The same hand that had slapped me. The same hand that had thrown my suitcase into the slush. "Please, baby," she pleaded, seeing me pause. "We are victims here too. He stole from me. He ruined us. You have to help us. You are the CEO. You have money. You can fix this. We can start over. I will make your favorite dinner. We can be a family again." Bianca looked up too, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Yeah, Zara. He is gone now. It is just us girls. We need you." I looked at them. Really looked at them. They didn't want me. They wanted the CEO. They wanted the checkbook. They wanted Phoenix Capital to swoop in and pay the mortgage and hide the shame. They were not sorry they had hurt me. They were sorry they had lost. I turned my body to face them fully. I took a step closer. Mama Louise's eyes lit up. She thought she had won. She thought the old Zara, the desperate for love Zara, was coming back. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice calm and conversational. "I can fix this. I have the money. I own the bank. I own the house. I could write a check right now that would make all of this go away." "Yes, yes," Mama Louise cried, nodding eagerly. "Thank God. Thank God for you, Zara." I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "But I won't." The hope vanished from their faces, instantly replaced by shock. "What?" Mama Louise whispered. "I said I won't," I repeated. "You evicted me on Christmas Eve because I was a liability. You said you wanted to enjoy your old age without my negative energy. Well, Mom, I am giving you exactly what you wanted. I am removing myself from your life completely." "But we will lose the house," Bianca shrieked. "The bank will take everything." "Actually," I said, checking my watch, "the bank already took everything. I foreclosed on the property 10 minutes ago. My security team is changing the locks as we speak." "You can't do that," Mama Louise screamed. "That is my home." "It was your home," I corrected her. "Now it is an asset in my portfolio. And unlike you, I don't let sentimentality get in the way of business." I turned around and started walking down the aisle. "Zara, you can't leave us here," Mama Louise wailed, her voice echoing off the walls. "I am your mother." I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The hallway was bright and full of people, but I felt lighter than air. I didn't look back. I didn't feel guilty. I felt cleansed. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright Atlanta sun. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door. "Where to, Ms. Jenkins?" he asked. "Take me to the restaurant," I said, sliding into the leather seat. I have a grand reopening to plan, and I need to hire a new manager. I think Miss Etta deserves a promotion. As the car pulled away, I watched the courthouse recede in the rearview mirror. I saw Mama Louise and Bianca stumble out the front doors, looking small and lost in the big city. They had each other, and they had nothing else. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung shut behind me, muting the chaos of the courtroom, but the silence did not last long. Within seconds, the doors burst open again. The sound of frantic high heels clicking against the pavement echoed in the humid Atlanta air. Zara. Zara. Wait. It was Mama Louise. She was running, stumbling slightly in her designer shoes, her hat askew, her face a mask of desperate panic. Bianca was right behind her, looking pale and small, stripped of the arrogance that had defined her for her entire life. I stopped near the curb where my driver was waiting. I didn't turn around immediately. I took a moment to breathe in the city air. It smelled of exhaust and blooming magnolias, but to me it smelled like victory. I slowly put on my sunglasses, shielding my eyes from the glare, and turned to face them one last time. Mama Louise caught up to me, grabbing my arm with a grip that was meant to be affectionate, but felt more like a claw. "Zara, baby, please," she panted, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "You can't just walk away like this. We need to talk. We are family." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. I didn't shake it off. I just looked at it until she became uncomfortable and let go. "There is nothing to talk about, Mom," I said, my voice even and cool. "The judge said everything that needed to be said." "Don't listen to that judge," she cried, wringing her hands. "He doesn't know us. He doesn't know how much I love you." It was Brad. It was all Brad. He twisted my mind. Zara. He made me believe terrible things. I am an old woman. I was vulnerable. He took advantage of me. "You can't blame your mother for being tricked by a con artist." Bianca stepped forward, nodding vigorously. Her voice was trembling. "She is right, Zara. Brad is a monster. I see that now. I am going to divorce him. I promise. It will just be us girls again, like it used to be. We can be a team, you, me, and Mom. We can run the restaurant together. We can be happy." I looked at Bianca. For a moment I remembered the little sister I used to braid hair for. But then I remembered the woman who had slapped me. I remembered the woman who had laughed while I was drowning in the kitchen sink. "We were never a team, Bianca," I said softly. "You were a clique, and I was the punching bag you used to make yourselves feel better. But that is in the past." Mama Louise pleaded, reaching for me again. "We can start over. Look at you. You are so successful. You are powerful. You can save us, Zara. I know you have a good heart. You paid for my surgery. You paid for the house. You have always taken care of us even when we didn't deserve it. Don't stop now, please. I am your mother. I am old. Where will I go?" She was playing her final card, the guilt card, the card that had worked on me for 32 years. She was banking on the fact that I was still the desperate little girl craving her approval. She thought that if she begged hard enough, if she reminded me of her frailty, I would open my checkbook and buy their love one more time. I took a step closer to her. I lowered my sunglasses just enough so she could look into my eyes. There was no anger there, no fire, just a frozen ocean of indifference. "You know, Mom," I said, my voice conversational as if we were discussing the weather, "you said something in the courtroom that really stuck with me. You screamed that I was mentally sick." Mama Louise flinched. I didn't mean that. I was upset. I was—" "No, you were right," I interrupted her. "I think I am sick." I paused, letting them think for a second that I was cracking, that I was admitting defeat. "I went to a doctor recently," I continued, a small cold smile playing on my lips, "and he gave me a very specific diagnosis. He told me that I have developed a severe, life-threatening allergy." "An allergy?" Bianca asked, confused. "To what?" To hypocrites I said, the smile vanishing instantly. I straightened up, towering over them in my heels. You didn't want a daughter Louise. You wanted a servant. You didn't want a sister Bianca. You wanted a scapegoat. You were happy to watch me rot in a basement as long as I paid the bills. You were happy to throw me out in the snow as long as you got your millions. The only reason you are standing here crying right now is because the check bounced. Zara, no, Mama Louise whispered. I am not your savior, I said, turning toward the car door that the driver was holding open for me. And I am certainly not your retirement plan. You have your health. You have each other. And you have the consequences of your own actions. I suggest you get comfortable with them. I slid into the back seat of the black SUV. The leather was cool and comforting. Zara. Don't do this! Mama Louise screamed, lunging at the car. The driver, a large man named Marcus, who had been with me for 2 years, stepped in front of her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a solid wall of muscle. Step back, ma'am, Marcus said, his voice low and firm. I pressed the button on the door. The tinted window slid up slowly, erasing the image of my mother and sister standing on the sidewalk. The last thing I saw was Mama Louise collapsing into Bianca's arms, wailing not for her lost daughter, but for her lost lifestyle. Drive, Marcus, I said. The car pulled away into the traffic. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air conditioning that smelled of freedom. I pulled out my phone and blocked 2 numbers. Then I deleted them. It was done. Transition to present day. The camera moves smoothly through the elegant living room where the story began. The lighting is warm now, the golden hour sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, peaceful shadows across the room. We see Zara sitting on the sofa exactly where she was at the start. She looks relaxed. The tension that held her shoulders tight is gone. She is holding a glass of vintage red wine, swirling it gently. On the table in front of her, the picture frame that was face down is now standing up. The camera zooms in. It is a photo of a younger Zara and her father Otis standing in front of the original Soul Kitchen. They are both laughing, covered in flour, looking genuinely happy. That was 2 years ago, I say, my voice softer now, intimate, talking directly to you. People ask me what happened to them. Well, Brad is currently serving a 5-year sentence for wire fraud and forgery. Bianca divorced him, of course. Last I heard, she is working as a receptionist at a dental office in the suburbs, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with our mother. I take a sip of wine. I don't visit, I don't send cards, and I don't check up on them. Some people might call that cold. They might say that you should forgive family no matter what. But I learned that forgiveness does not mean access. You can forgive someone for cutting you, but you are a fool if you hand them the knife again. The camera pulls back slightly, showing the expanse of Zara's life. The art on the walls, the quiet luxury. But mostly the solitude that feels like peace, not loneliness. I kept the restaurant. Otis Soul Kitchen is thriving. We opened 3 new locations this year, but the original spot, I didn't change a thing. The vinyl records are back on the shelves. The menu is exactly how Dad wrote it. And every Sunday we still feed the elders for free. I stand up and walk to the window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the twilight. They tried to bury me. They didn't know I was a seed. They tried to break me. They didn't know I was forged in fire. They lost everything. Their house, their reputation, their false pride. But the biggest thing they lost was the only person who actually loved them for who they were, not for what they had. I turned back to the camera, a small, mysterious smile playing on my lips. As for me, I have the one thing money couldn't buy them. I have peace. I sleep soundly at night. I walk over to the dining table. It is set for one, but it is set beautifully. In the center of the table is a simple white bowl steaming hot. And tonight I am not eating steak. I am not eating caviar. I am celebrating the anniversary of my freedom with the only meal that matters. I pick up the spoon and dip it into the bowl. Dad's vegetable soup, the same soup they mocked me for eating. The same soup they called garbage. It tastes like love. It tastes like victory. I raise my wine glass to the camera, to those of you watching who feel like the black sheep, to those of you hiding in the basement, to those of you being told you are not enough. I lean in close. Build your empire in the dark. And when the time comes, don't just walk away. Drive away in the car you bought with the money they didn't know you had. The most powerful lesson from Zara's journey is that your worth is never defined by those who refuse to see it. When family becomes your biggest bully, walking away is an act of survival, not weakness. Zara proved that true power doesn't need to roar. It builds quietly in the shadows. While they focused on maintaining an image, she focused on building an empire. The ultimate revenge wasn't the foreclosure or the lawsuit. It was the unshakable peace she found on the other side of their rejection. If you have ever had to build your own peace in the dark, hit subscribe and share your story in the comments below.